The transmission came through the deep space communication channel late at night. Kevin was working in his office at the Strategic Institute when the alert appeared on his screen. A new species had made contact with human space. They were requesting an emergency meeting with Earth's leadership. Kevin read the details carefully. The new species called themselves the Syntherians. They were a technologically advanced civilization that had existed peacefully for thousands of years. But they had just discovered something that frightened them deeply. They had found evidence of a massive invasion fleet moving through the outer regions of the galaxy, a force larger than anything humanity had ever encountered, a force that seemed to be moving directly toward human space. The military immediately went on high alert. The government called an emergency session. Kevin was brought in to advise on strategy, just as he had been countless times over the past several years. He entered the war room in the Pentagon, where the top military leaders of Earth were gathered. Admiral Lisa Montenegro was now the commanding officer of the defense fleet. She stood at the center of the room, looking at tactical displays that showed the estimated position of the approaching threat. "How much time do we have?" Kevin asked, moving to stand beside Lisa. 6 months, Lisa said quietly. "Maybe 7. The Syntherians provided us with tracking data. This fleet is massive, Kevin. Bigger than the Tyrexian Empire's entire military force. And it's not just one civilization. Intelligence suggests it's a coalition of hostile species that have unified under a single command structure." Kevin studied the display. The numbers were staggering. Thousands of ships, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, weapons technology that human intelligence could only partially understand. This was not like the Tyrexian invasion. This was an existential threat to humanity's survival. "We need to contact the Syntherians," Kevin said. "We need to understand their defensive capabilities. We need to know what they know about this coalition force." "Already working on that," Lisa said. "The Syntherians are sending a delegation to Earth. They arrive tomorrow. They want to coordinate a defense strategy with us." That night, Kevin could not sleep. He sat in his apartment overlooking the Earth, thinking about what was coming. He had won the war against the Tyrexians through unconventional thinking. He had survived a court-martial by refusing to compromise his principles. He had changed the military's approach to leadership and innovation. But now he faced a challenge that made everything he had done before seem small. The Syntherians arrived the next day. They were humanoid in appearance, but with features that clearly marked them as alien. Their skin had a faint luminescent quality. Their eyes were large and reflective. Their leader was a female named Coordinator Astra. She spoke perfect English, learned through rapid information absorption technology that humans had only recently begun to understand. "The coalition force is unprecedented," Astra said at the strategic briefing. "It was assembled by a species called the Vex. They have unified 17 different civilizations under their command. They are moving through the galaxy, absorbing planets and species. They see the galaxy as a resource to be conquered and consumed. How powerful is their force compared to ours combined?" Admiral Lisa asked. "Estimated to be 4 times more powerful than Earth and Syntheria combined," Astra said. "Their weapons technology is advanced but not impossible to counter. However, their command structure is absolute. They have a central leadership that controls all decisions across all 17 species. It is similar to what you experienced with the Tyrexians, but far more complex and far more rigid." Kevin listened carefully. He heard the echo of the Tyrexian situation in Astra's description. Central command, unified hierarchy, absolute control. These were the same weaknesses that Kevin had exploited before. But this time the situation was more complicated. "They are not like the Tyrexians," Astra continued. "The Vex have learned from history. They have studied conflicts throughout the galaxy. They know about the threat of independent thinking. They have deliberately suppressed any possibility of creativity or adaptation among their subject species. Every soldier, every captain, every officer is bound by strict protocol. Deviation from protocol results in immediate termination." Kevin stood up. Everyone in the room looked at him. "Then their absolute obedience is also their absolute weakness," Kevin said. "It's the same weakness as before, just taken to an extreme. If we can somehow disrupt their command structure, if we can force them to think creatively or to make independent decisions, they will fall apart. But they have anticipated that possibility," Astra said. "They have created redundant command systems. If the primary leadership is destroyed, Backup systems immediately take control. They have learned from the Tyrexian failure. Kevin walked to the tactical display. He studied the fleet positions, the estimated weapons capabilities, the defensive structures the coalition was building. He thought about human innovation. He thought about the training program he had created. He thought about the Hayes Doctrine that was now being taught across multiple species military academies. We can't beat them in a direct confrontation, Kevin said. Our weapons are not as advanced. Our numbers are smaller. If we try conventional warfare, we will lose. But conventional warfare is what they expect. They have planned for conventional warfare. They have prepared for it. What they have not prepared for is something unprecedented, something that requires thinking beyond their programmed responses. Lisa moved closer to Kevin. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that we need to gather representatives from every species that has contacted us diplomatically, Kevin said. I'm thinking we need to propose a unified defense alliance. Not a military alliance based on shared firepower, but an alliance based on shared thinking. We propose a meeting, a genuine meeting where we discuss not just military strategy, but philosophical approaches to conflict. The Vex will see that as a provocation, one of the admirals said. Good, Kevin said. Let them see it as a provocation. Let them send a delegation to the meeting. And when they arrive, we show them something they have never seen before. We show them people from different species, different cultures, different backgrounds, all coming together not because they have been ordered to do so, but because they choose to. We show them what cooperation looks like when it comes from choice rather than command. Astra was listening intently. She understood what Kevin was suggesting. It was not a military strategy. It was something more fundamental. It was a demonstration of human potential. It was a challenge to the very foundation of the Vex coalition. Over the next 2 months, Kevin coordinated with the Syntherians and other allied species. They organized a peace conference on a neutral space station located between human space and Syntherian territory. They invited every species within communication range. Over 50 different civilizations sent representatives. The Vex sent a delegation led by a military commander named Torex. He arrived with guards and advanced scanning equipment. He looked around the conference room with obvious disdain. Seeing all the different species gathered together without visible hierarchy, without clear command structure, without unified appearance. This is chaos, Torex said bluntly. How do you function without proper command structure? How do you make decisions when every voice has equal value? Kevin stood up to address him. We function because we believe that every perspective has value. We make decisions slowly sometimes, yes, but we make decisions that reflect the wisdom of everyone involved. We function through voluntary cooperation rather than enforced obedience. That is what makes us strong. Voluntary cooperation is weakness, Torex responded. It leads to disagreement. It leads to inefficiency. A unified command structure creates strength through absolute order. But your absolute order cannot adapt, Kevin said. We have learned through history that perfect order creates perfect vulnerability. When the situation changes, when something unexpected happens, your system cannot respond because your soldiers have no training in independent thought. They can only follow orders. And if the orders are wrong, or if the commander is killed, or if the situation changes in a way nobody anticipated, your entire system collapses. Torex stared at Kevin with cold intensity. You are trying to convince me that chaos is superior to order. I am trying to convince you that structured flexibility is superior to rigid order, Kevin said. I have fought wars. I have faced enemies more powerful than myself. I have won because I was willing to think differently. I am trying to teach that lesson to others. That lesson is that innovation and adaptation are not weaknesses. They are the greatest strengths. The conference lasted for 3 days. Representatives from 50 different species sat together and discussed their approaches to conflict, cooperation, and survival. They shared stories of challenges they had faced and how they had overcome those challenges. The Vex delegation watched and listened, growing increasingly uncomfortable. On the final day, Torex stood up. You are showing me your weakness, he said. You are showing me that you are fragmented, divided, and philosophically opposed to unified command. The Vex coalition will eliminate each of you separately. You have no chance against us united. But as Torex spoke, something extraordinary happened. Representatives. Kevin Hayes stood in the visitors' room at Facility 7, watching as Amanda Phillips entered carrying a folder. Her face showed something that Kevin had not seen in months. It was hope. "We have something," Amanda said without preamble. She opened the folder and showed Kevin official military documents. "The president has signed an executive order. You're being granted a full pardon. Conditional on the following. You resign from the military, you do not seek reinstatement, and you agree to work as a civilian consultant to the Department of Defense." Kevin read the documents carefully. The language was diplomatic and careful, but what it said was clear. The military establishment had decided that holding him in prison was worse for their reputation than releasing him. But they also wanted to ensure he could never challenge their authority again. "What if I refuse?" Kevin asked. "You'll serve out your remaining time," Amanda said. "But Kevin, I don't think you should refuse. This is a victory. Not the complete victory you might have wanted, but a victory nonetheless. You'll be free. You'll have your life back." Kevin looked at the documents again. The pardon was signed by the president herself. It represented a decision at the highest levels of government that his imprisonment was a mistake. But it also represented a compromise. The military would not admit they were wrong. They would simply remove him from their system. "I'll take it," Kevin said finally, "but I want something in writing. I want a statement explaining that my tactics were sound and that my strategic thinking was valuable. I want the record to show that my methods were not reckless." Amanda nodded. "I'll negotiate that. It might take a few days. It took 5 days. But Amanda returned with a revised document that included a statement from the Department of Defense acknowledging that Commander Hayes had demonstrated exceptional strategic thinking and that his tactical innovations had been effective in defeating the Tyrexian threat. It did not explicitly apologize, but it was an acknowledgement that he had not been reckless. Kevin signed the pardon. He was released from Facility 7 48 hours later. When he walked out of the detention facility, Lisa was waiting for him at the landing platform. She threw her arms around him, something she never would have done while he was in the military, something that would have been considered unprofessional, but those constraints no longer applied. "Welcome back," she said. The news of Kevin's release spread instantly. The media coverage was intense and celebratory. People who had been fighting for his freedom felt vindicated. The message was clear. Humanity had recognized that it had made a mistake, and it was trying to correct that mistake. But Kevin knew that the real work was just beginning. He met with the Secretary of Defense 2 weeks after his release. They sat in a secure conference room in the Pentagon. The secretary was a woman named Catherine Morris, someone who had not been involved in the court-martial, but who understood the political complexity of the situation. "We want you to consult with us on military doctrine," Secretary Morris said. "We want you to help us think about how we can incorporate adaptive thinking into our military structure without completely abandoning the command hierarchy that holds us together. You want me to help you figure out how to have it both ways," Kevin said. "You want discipline and innovation at the same time." "Yes," Secretary Morris said. "Is that possible?" Kevin thought about it. "It's possible if you select the right kind of commanders. If you train officers not just to follow orders, but to understand when orders need to be adapted based on circumstances. If you create a military culture that values both discipline and thinking. We'd like you to design a training program," Secretary Morris said. "Start with military academy cadets. Train them to think critically about orders. Train them to understand when rules should be broken and when they should be followed. It's a delicate balance, but I think you're the only person who can do it effectively," Kevin agreed. Over the following year, he worked with the military to develop what became known as the Hayes Doctrine. It was a new approach to military training that emphasized both discipline and adaptive thinking. It taught officers to understand the principles behind the rules, not just the rules themselves. It created a framework for when and how orders could be adapted based on tactical circumstances. The training program was implemented at the military academies. Young officers began learning Kevin's philosophy of combining structure with flexibility. News organizations covered the program extensively. Alien governments, watching from across the galaxy, began commenting on humanity's willingness to evolve its military thinking. 3 years after his release, Kevin was invited to speak at the United Nations Assembly. Representatives from every nation on Earth attended, and the session was broadcast to all human colonies and space stations. Kevin stood at the podium and looked out at the assembled leaders of humanity. "The war with the Tyrexians taught us something important," Kevin said. It taught us that humanity's greatest strength is not our weapons or our technology. Our greatest strength is our ability to think differently, to adapt, to see possibilities that others cannot see. But for years, our military system tried to suppress that strength. It tried to make us all think the same way. It tried to turn independent thinkers into machines that simply followed orders. He paused, letting his words sink in. I was punished for thinking differently. I was punished for using the very trait that saved us from invasion. But I want to tell you something. I understand why the military courts did what they did. They were trying to protect discipline. They were trying to prevent chaos. Those are legitimate concerns. But discipline and innovation do not have to be enemies. They can work together. Kevin described the Hayes Doctrine. He explained how it was designed to create officers who understood both when to follow orders and when to think independently. He talked about the importance of balancing rigid structure with creative flexibility. In the future, as we encounter other species, as we face challenges we cannot predict, we will need commanders who can think beyond the standard response, Kevin said. We will need officers who are brave enough to question if questioning is necessary. The military system I helped design is meant to create those kinds of leaders. Leaders who are disciplined but not blind. Leaders who understand the rules well enough to know when those rules need to be bent. The applause was thunderous. Even military officers who had opposed Kevin stood and clapped. But the most remarkable thing happened after the speech. A message arrived from the Kepler Federation, the coalition of peaceful alien species that had spoken out during Kevin's trial. The message was addressed directly to Kevin. It offered him a position as a strategic consultant to the Federation's Defense Council. They wanted to learn from his approach to adaptive military thinking. Kevin considered the offer carefully. Lisa encouraged him to take it. You've changed Earth's military, she said. Now change the galaxy's approach to defense. Show them what human thinking can do. Kevin accepted the position. He spent the next 5 years traveling between Earth and various alien worlds, teaching military leaders from a dozen different species about adaptive strategic thinking. He showed them how to balance structure with creativity. He demonstrated the power of thinking differently when faced with unprecedented challenges. In the end, Kevin Hayes did not become famous as a military commander. Instead, he became famous as a philosopher of strategy and a teacher of adaptive thinking. The war he had won was almost forgotten. What people remembered was his conviction that thinking differently was not a crime, but a necessity. Young officers across human space studied his methods. Alien military academies incorporated principles from the Hayes Doctrine into their own training programs. He had transformed not just Earth's military, but the approach to defense across multiple species. Years later, Lisa, who had become an admiral herself, visited Kevin at his office at the United Nations Strategic Institute. They looked out at the Earth below and Lisa smiled. You lost the battle to stay in the military, she said, but you won the larger war. You changed how we think about leadership and innovation. That's a bigger victory than any single tactical success. Kevin nodded. He thought about the court-martial, the prison, the struggle to be recognized. And he understood that sometimes the greatest victories come not from winning wars, but from changing how people think about what victory really means. Humanity had learned to value not just the man who won the battle, but the kind of thinking that made winning possible. And in that understanding, Kevin had found his true legacy. The man who had won a war and got court-martialed had become the man who taught the galaxy how to think. The courtroom was silent as the 5 judges entered and took their seats. Kevin stood up, and so did Amanda Phillips. Everyone understood that this moment would determine the rest of Kevin's life. The chief judge, Admiral Harold Morrison, looked at the papers in front of him. He had already prepared his statement. This court has reviewed all evidence presented in the case of Commander Kevin Hayes versus the Military Authority of Earth, Admiral Morrison said. His voice was formal and measured. We have heard testimony from both the prosecution and the defense. We have examined tactical data, reviewed military protocols, and considered the circumstances surrounding the decisions made during the recent conflict with the Tyrexian Empire. Kevin held his breath. Amanda Phillips stood perfectly still beside him. The court finds that Commander Hayes did indeed violate Military Conduct Code Section 247, which explicitly forbids subordinate officers from disobeying direct orders from commanding officers. The order to hold position came from General Morrison. Himself and Commander Hayes deliberately chose to disregard that order. This fact is not in dispute. Kevin felt his stomach drop. They were going to find him guilty. However, Admiral Morrison continued, the court also finds merit in the defense argument that Commander Hayes acted with calculated intent based on military analysis rather than reckless abandon. We find that while he violated protocols, his tactical reasoning was sound, and his strategic assessment of the enemy weakness was accurate. Admiral Morrison adjusted his glasses and continued reading. The court finds Commander Hayes guilty on 3 of the 4 charges. We find him guilty of unauthorized tactical deviation. We find him guilty of violation of Military Conduct Code Section 247. We find him not guilty of reckless endangerment, as the evidence suggests that he had calculated the risks involved. The courtroom exploded. Reporters shouted questions. People in the gallery stood up and began talking loudly. Some people looked devastated. Others looked angry. Admiral Morrison raised his hand, and the courtroom gradually quieted. Sentencing will now be announced, he said. Commander Kevin Hayes, you are hereby stripped of your military rank. You are dishonorably discharged from the military service of Earth. You are sentenced to 2 years in military detention at Facility 7 on the lunar base. The gavel came down with a sound that seemed to echo through every space station and every military base in human space. Kevin felt himself go numb. He had won the war, but the military had taken everything from him. No rank, no career, no freedom. 2 years in prison. Amanda Phillips grabbed his arm. We can appeal, she said quickly. We can take this to the civilian courts. We can get this overturned. But Kevin was not listening. He was looking out at Lisa, who stood in the gallery with tears running down her face. She started to stand, as if to move toward him, but military police immediately moved to intercept her. 2 officers grabbed her arms and held her back. She did not resist. She simply watched as Kevin was led away. The images of Kevin being taken into custody spread instantly across the news networks. Cameras caught every moment. The man who had saved Earth was being marched away in chains, surrounded by guards. It was the most dramatic moment in the trial, and it would be replayed thousands of times. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, massive protests erupted in every major city on Earth. People poured into the streets demanding Kevin's release. They carried signs that said, "Free the hero," and "Justice for Kevin Hayes." News networks conducted polls showing that 73% of the public believed the sentence was unjust. Military bases received thousands of letters from citizens. The military communications channels were flooded with messages. Some soldiers were openly questioning the verdict. Others were torn between their sense of justice and their commitment to military discipline. But something else was happening, something that nobody expected. News of the trial was spreading beyond human space. The Tyrexian Empire, watching from their territory, made an official statement. The statement came through the diplomatic channels. It was broadcast across all human news networks. A Tyrexian ambassador, speaking through a translator, made remarks that changed everything. "We acknowledge the strategic defeat of our forces," the ambassador said. The alien voice was strange and mechanical, but the words were clear. "We understand that we were defeated not by superior firepower, but by superior thinking." The human commander understood something that we, as a unified species operating on hierarchical command structure, could not adapt to. The human demonstrated creative thinking, adaptability, and the willingness to make decisions that broke from established patterns. The statement continued. "We recognize that your species has shown exceptional qualities. You possess the ability to think independently while still operating as a unified force. This is a rare and valuable trait in the galaxy. To punish your greatest strategic mind for exercising the very thinking that saved your species is, from our perspective, a grave error. It sends a message that humanity fears its own potential for innovation." The Tyrexian statement became viral across human space. Scientists and philosophers began discussing what it meant. News commentators analyzed it in depth. Alien governments and interstellar organizations that had been watching the trial began making their own statements supporting the ambassador's assessment. Within a week, other alien species had issued formal statements expressing concern about Kevin's discharge. The Kepler Federation, a coalition of peaceful species in the Galactic Council, issued a joint statement suggesting that Kevin's punishment was undermining human credibility in galactic affairs. The pressure on the military leadership became immense. Politicians began demanding explanations for why they were punishing their most successful military commander. The public outcry grew louder. Protests became more organized. Some military officers began speaking out against the verdict, risking their own careers in the process. Lisa, despite being officially discouraged from public statements, gave an interview to a major news network. She spoke carefully but clearly about Kevin's leadership and his brilliance as a tactical commander. She described how his decision had saved the lives of thousands of soldiers. She said that discharging him dishonorably was a grave injustice. 6 weeks after the sentencing, Kevin was transferred to Facility 7 on the lunar base. It was a military detention facility, secure and isolated. But even there, Kevin could see what was happening in the outside world. He received news reports. He watched the coverage of the ongoing protests. He saw the statements from alien governments. Lisa managed to visit him once. The facility had strict rules about contact, but Lisa was still an active officer, and she used that status to gain access. They sat across from each other with a transparent barrier between them, just like before. "The world is changing," Lisa said. "The admirals are scared. They're afraid of what this might mean for military authority. Some of them are talking privately about offering you a presidential pardon, but they want it to be done quietly without making it seem like they were wrong." "I don't want a quiet pardon," Kevin said. "If they're going to do this, it needs to be done openly with acknowledgement that the trial was a mistake. Kevin, you're in prison. You can't afford to be proud about this." "I can, and I have to be," Kevin said firmly. "Because if I just accept a quiet pardon and disappear, then nothing changes. The next officer who thinks creatively will still be punished. The military will still fear innovation. I didn't save Earth just to let the system go back to the way it was." Lisa looked at him with a mixture of pride and concern. She knew he was right, but she also knew that Kevin's stubbornness might cost him dearly. 3 months into his imprisonment, the political pressure reached a breaking point. The Secretary of Defense herself issued a statement saying that the military was reviewing Kevin's case. Various admirals and generals began giving interviews suggesting that while the court-martial was conducted fairly, the outcome might not have reflected the full complexity of the situation. It was the language of people trying to prepare the public for a reversal without admitting they had been wrong. The courtroom was filled with people. News cameras lined the back walls, broadcasting the trial to every corner of human space. Kevin sat at the defense table next to his attorney, Amanda Phillips, a woman in her 50s with sharp intelligence in her eyes and a reputation for defending impossible cases. The military court consisted of 5 judges, all high-ranking officers with decades of service. At the front of the room sat the prosecution team, led by Commander Victor Cross. He stood up and began to present the charges against Kevin Hayes. The charges were read one by one: gross insubordination, unauthorized tactical deviation, reckless endangerment, violations of Military Conduct Code Section 447. Each charge carried the potential for years in military prison. "This trial is not about whether Commander Hayes won the battle," Cross said, beginning his opening statement. "This trial is about whether he had the right to do what he did. The military exists to protect humanity through discipline, structure, and obedience to command authority. Commander Hayes threw all of that away." He walked in front of the judges, his military bearing sharp and commanding. "The facts are simple. General Morrison ordered Commander Hayes to hold his position. He was clear. He was direct. There was no ambiguity, and Commander Hayes disobeyed. He ordered a retreat against direct orders. He changed the entire tactical approach without permission. He gambled with the lives of thousands of soldiers. Cross displayed tactical data on the large screens. He showed how the battle could have gone differently. He brought in junior officers who testified that they were confused by Kevin's orders. Some of them said that they had questioned whether the commander was making a mistake. One officer, Lieutenant Mark Powell, said that he actually considered refusing to follow the retreat order because it contradicted what General Morrison had instructed. If this retreat order had been a mistake, Cross said, if Commander Hayes's judgment had been wrong by even a small amount, the entire human fleet would have been destroyed, not just defeated, not just scattered, completely annihilated. Every soldier would have died. Earth would have fallen within days. The prosecution painted Kevin as a man who had gotten lucky, a man who had taken an insane risk and happened to be right. They suggested that his success had blinded him to how dangerous his actions truly were. Amanda Phillips stood up for the defense. She was calm and measured. She did not shout or make dramatic gestures. Instead, she presented a different picture of events. Commander Hayes did not gamble, she said quietly. He calculated. He studied the enemy for 3 days. He analyzed their patterns, their command structure, their methods of operation. He made an informed decision based on military intelligence and strategic analysis. She called witnesses. She brought in military strategists who explained that Kevin's tactical thinking represented exactly the kind of adaptive intelligence that humans possessed. She brought in xenobiologists who confirmed that the Tyrexian command structure really was centralized and dependent on constant guidance from above. Most importantly, she brought in soldiers who had served under Kevin. They testified about his leadership, his intelligence, his ability to make quick decisions under pressure. They described how his retreat order had seemed strange at first, but then they understood. They understood that Kevin was thinking several moves ahead, exactly like a chess player. He was not running away. He was luring the enemy into a trap. The prosecution wants you to believe that Commander Hayes acted on impulse, Amanda said, but the evidence does not support that. Every decision he made was calculated. Every order he gave was part of a larger strategy. The fact that the strategy was unconventional does not make it reckless. It makes it brilliant. The trial lasted for 5 days. During that time, Kevin sat in the courtroom and listened to his actions being analyzed, questioned, and debated. He watched as the judges took notes, their expressions difficult to read. He felt the weight of the decision bearing down on all of them. One of the most important moments came when Amanda called Commander Lisa Montenegro to the stand. Lisa walked to the witness box in her dress uniform, her shoulders straight and her chin high. She was no longer confined like Kevin, but everyone knew that her career was on the line. Captain Montenegro, Amanda asked, were you concerned about Commander Hayes's decision to order the retreat? Lisa paused before answering. Everyone in the courtroom waited. This was her moment to either stand by Kevin or distance herself from him. At first, yes, Lisa said. I was concerned. It contradicted our orders. But as I watched the tactical display, I began to understand what he was doing. He was using the Tyrexians' own nature against them. He was applying principles of military strategy that nobody else in that war room had considered. Once I understood the strategy, I was no longer concerned. I was confident that it would work. And if it had not worked, Amanda asked, then Commander Hayes would have been wrong, and I would have made a different choice, Lisa said. She looked directly at Kevin, then back at Amanda. But he was not wrong, and that is not a crime. Commander Victor Cross stood up for his closing argument. He looked tired, but his voice remained strong and authoritative. Yes, Commander Hayes was right, Cross said. Yes, he won the battle. Yes, he saved lives. But winning does not excuse breaking the rules. If we allow officers to disobey orders whenever they think they know better, we destroy the entire military structure. We create chaos. We create a system where every commander makes their own decisions, follows their own judgment, and ignores the authority above them. He pointed at Kevin. This man thinks he is smarter than the high command. He thinks his judgment is better than our systems. Maybe he is right. Maybe his tactical thinking is superior. But if we reward that behavior, if we say that breaking rules is acceptable as long as you win, then we are telling every other officer that they can do the same thing. And one day an officer will be wrong. And millions will die. Amanda Phillips stood for her closing argument. She was brief but powerful. Commander Hayes is not a criminal, she said. He is a soldier who faced an impossible situation and thought beyond the normal boundaries. He is exactly the kind of thinking that humanity needs in a dangerous galaxy. The military can exist with rules, yes, but it can also exist with flexibility, with adaptation, with brilliant commanders who know when to break the rules to save their people. She looked at the judges. If you punish Commander Hayes for thinking creatively and winning a war, you are telling humanity that we do not value innovation. You are telling our soldiers that following orders is more important than saving lives. Is that the message you want to send? The judges said they would deliver their verdict in 3 days. For those 3 days, Kevin was returned to his confined quarters. The news coverage was intense. People debated whether he should be punished or celebrated. Some military officers gave interviews saying that the trial was a disgrace. Others said that military discipline had to be maintained. Lisa visited him one more time before the verdict. She brought news from the outside. "The people want you freed," she said. "There have been massive protests on Earth and in all the colonies. Millions of people are saying that you should be honored, not prosecuted. They're saying that this trial is destroying the credibility of the military." "And what do the admirals say?" Kevin asked. "They're divided," Lisa said. "Some of them are afraid of public opinion. Others are determined to make an example of you no matter what the people want. They see you as a threat to military order." Kevin nodded slowly. He had known all along that this trial was about more than whether he had broken rules. It was about whether the military was willing to adapt and change, or whether it would cling to old ways even when those ways were failing. Kevin Hayes sat in a small room with gray walls. There were no windows, no decorations, nothing that could distract a person from thinking about their situation. Across the table from him sat Admiral Patricia Gardner, a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to see through lies. Next to her was another officer, Commander Victor Cross, younger and sharper looking, with a notebook filled with questions written down beforehand. It had been 2 weeks since the victory. 2 weeks since Kevin had saved Earth from invasion, and now he was being investigated like a criminal. "Walk us through your decision-making process on the day of the battle," Admiral Gardner said. Her voice was calm and professional, but there was an edge to it that made Kevin's shoulders tense. Kevin had prepared for this. He knew the questions would come. "I analyzed the Tyrexian fleet patterns and identified a critical weakness in their command structure. Their entire military system depends on central command authority. I designed a strategy that would exploit that weakness. You disobeyed direct orders from the High Command," Commander Cross said flatly. He tapped his pen on his notebook. "General Morrison specifically instructed you to hold your position. Instead, you ordered a retreat. That's insubordination, Commander. That's a violation of Military Code Section 247. "The situation changed," Kevin said carefully. "When I saw an opportunity to save more lives through a different approach, I took it." "That's what any commander would do." Admiral Gardner leaned back in her chair. "That's where you're wrong. Any proper commander would have requested permission from the High Command to deviate from established orders. You did not. You acted on your own authority, and you risked the entire human fleet on a gamble." "It was not a gamble," Kevin said, his voice growing louder. "I had calculated the risks. I understood the alien weakness. I knew the strategy would work." "But you could not have known that for certain," Cross said. He stood up and walked to the small table in the corner where a projector displayed tactical data. "If you had miscalculated by even a small amount, the Tyrexian fleet would have destroyed our forces. Earth would have fallen. Billions of people would have died. And you made that decision alone, without authorization, without oversight, without even consulting with your superiors." Kevin felt his anger rising. "And now Earth is safe. The Tyrexians are defeated. We're alive because I had the courage to think differently." "You had luck," Gardner said quietly. "You gambled and luck was on your side. But we cannot build a military system on luck and individual intuition. We have rules and procedures for a reason. Those rules exist to prevent chaos, to prevent reckless commanders from making decisions that could destroy us all." The interrogation lasted 6 hours. By the end, Kevin's head was pounding and his hands were shaking with frustration. They asked him the same questions over and over, trying to catch him in a contradiction, trying to find evidence that he had acted carelessly or recklessly. Finally, they released him. But they told him that he was suspended from active duty, effective immediately. He was not to leave Earth. He was not to make public statements about the battle. He was not to contact other military officers. He was confined to a residential facility and forbidden from his command. Lisa came to visit him the next day. She moved carefully through the security checkpoints, her uniform drawing suspicious looks from the guards. She had not been suspended, but everybody knew that she had been Kevin's closest ally. People were watching her carefully, They sat in a small visitor's room separated by a transparent barrier because Kevin's security clearance had been temporarily revoked. "How are you holding up?" Lisa asked. "This is insane," Kevin said. "I saved billions of lives and they're treating me like I committed treason." "I know," Lisa said quietly, "but there are officers who want you punished. There are admirals who think that commanders like you are dangerous. They believe that military order depends on absolute obedience and they see you as a threat to that order." "What are they saying about me?" Lisa hesitated. "Some people are calling you a hero. The people who served under you, the soldiers who survived the battle because of your tactical thinking, they're defending you fiercely. There have been protests in several cities with people demanding your release. And the others? The others are saying you're a reckless show-off who gambled with human lives and got lucky. They're saying that if your strategy had failed, you would have lost the entire fleet. They're painting you as a dangerous idealist who thinks he knows better than centuries of military tradition." Over the following weeks, the divide in public opinion became sharper. News outlets split into two camps. Some celebrated Kevin as a military genius who had revolutionized tactical thinking. Others portrayed him as a rogue commander who had violated protocol and should face severe punishment as an example to other officers who might think about disobeying orders. Kevin watched the news coverage from his confined quarters. He saw analysts arguing about him on television. He read newspapers that called him both a hero and a criminal, sometimes in the same article. The contradiction was maddening. Military officers began visiting him. Some wanted to hear about his tactical thinking. Others seemed to be taking the opportunity to interrogate him further, searching for inconsistencies in his story. Everyone treated him with a strange mixture of respect and suspicion. 2 months after his suspension, Kevin received word that the formal court-martial hearing had been scheduled. He would stand trial before a military court, with charges that included gross insubordination, unauthorized tactical deviation, and violations of the military conduct code. The news hit Kevin like a physical blow. This was not an investigation anymore. This was a trial. They were going to prosecute him. They were going to argue that despite winning the war, he deserved punishment. Lisa visited him again after the announcement. This time she looked frightened. "Kevin, they're serious about this," she said through the barrier. "The prosecution has assembled a strong case. They have testimonies from junior officers who said they were confused by your orders. They have calculations showing how close the battle came to disaster. They're building a narrative that your success was lucky rather than brilliant." "What about our people?" Kevin asked. "What about the officers who know what really happened?" "Many of them are afraid to testify in your favor," Lisa said quietly. "The military system is punishing anyone who openly supports you. Your supporters are being transferred to less desirable positions. They're being isolated. The message is clear. Support Kevin Hayes and you'll regret it." Kevin felt something break inside him. The same military system that he had served for 20 years, the same institution that he had fought to protect, was now turning against him. And it was doing so in a way that made speaking truth dangerous. "How much time do I have before the trial?" Kevin asked. 3 weeks, Lisa said. "And Kevin, I need to tell you something. I testified in your favor during the investigation. They've already started limiting my access to command-level decisions. They're going to bury me in paperwork or transfer me somewhere far from action. It's their way of warning me to stop defending you." Kevin looked at her through the transparent barrier, and for the first time since his suspension, he felt truly alone. He had saved Earth, but Earth was now trying to destroy him, and the people who stood with him were being punished for their loyalty. The alarm screamed through the corridors of the flagship Earth Command 1. Commander Kevin Hayes stood at the center of the war room, watching the tactical display light up with red dots. Each dot represented a Tyrexian warship, and there were hundreds of them. His hands gripped the edge of the console, feeling the vibration of the ship's engines struggling to maintain position. The Tyrexian Empire had arrived 3 weeks ago without warning. Their ships were larger, faster, and equipped with weapons that humanity had never seen before. The first battle had been a disaster. Entire fleets had been destroyed in hours. Now humanity had its back against the wall, and Kevin knew that if this battle was lost, Earth might fall within days. Captain Lisa Montenegro stood beside him, her dark eyes fixed on the same display. She had served with Kevin for 5 years, and she knew when he was thinking hard about something. His jaw was tight, and a small muscle at his temple twitched slightly. "They're holding position at Sector 7, Lisa said quietly. "Their command ship is in the center, protected by 3 layers of support vessels. We could launch a direct assault, but our losses would be catastrophic. We don't have the firepower to match them head-on." Kevin nodded slowly. He had studied the alien fleet patterns for 3 days straight, watching how they moved, how they communicated, how they responded to human attacks. Something had caught his attention during that study, something that nobody else at the High Command seemed to notice. The Tyrexians operated like a single organism. Every ship moved with perfect synchronization. Every maneuver was calculated and precise. They never made mistakes because every decision came from the top. The command ship made the calls, and every other vessel followed without hesitation or deviation. "What if we stop thinking like we're supposed to think?" Kevin said softly. Lisa turned to look at him. "Sir? Order all ships to begin a retreat," Kevin said. "Make it look real. Make it look like we're running scared." "Commander," Lisa's voice had an edge of concern. "The High Command specifically ordered us to hold our position. General Morrison said that any retreat would result in immediate removal from duty." Kevin met her gaze. "I know what they said, and I'm giving you a direct order." Lisa took a breath. She could disobey him right now. She could report this to the High Command. Instead, she turned to the communication officer and began issuing orders. The officers in the war room exchanged nervous glances, but nobody openly questioned their commander. The Earth Defense Fleet began to fall back. Ships broke formation and scattered in apparent disarray. On the Tyrexian tactical displays, the sight must have looked like victory approaching. The human forces were breaking apart. They were frightened. They were beaten. The Tyrexian fleet advanced. Kevin watched the movements carefully. Just as he had predicted, the alien ships moved in perfect formation, their command ship pushing deeper into space as they pursued the fleeing humans. Every vessel stayed exactly where the command structure demanded it be. There was no improvisation, no adaptation, just perfect obedience. "Now," Kevin said quietly, "execute attack pattern 7. The human ships, which had been fleeing in apparent chaos, suddenly changed direction with incredible precision. The maneuver had been calculated using the exact weakness Kevin had identified. The aliens were so dependent on centralized command that they moved like a single body, and when that body was struck at just the right angle, everything fell apart. The human forces turned and attacked not the outer ships but the command vessel at the center. The Tyrexians tried to redirect their fleet, but the delay was fatal. For the first time in their military history, the command structure experienced confusion. Ships received conflicting signals. Some captains tried to act on their own initiative, but they had never been trained for independent decision-making. The result was chaos. Kevin's ships tore through the Tyrexian fleet like a blade through soft cloth. The command ship took damage, critical damage. An explosion erupted from its core section. The massive vessel began to list and spin, its communication systems destroyed. Without the command ship sending orders, the Tyrexian fleet became a collection of confused, leaderless ships. Humanity's superior adaptability took over. Human captains, trained to think on their feet and make quick decisions, began coordinating attacks against isolated Tyrexian vessels. The battle turned completely in humanity's favor within 30 minutes. By the time the sun came up on Earth, the Tyrexian invasion force had been completely destroyed. Not a single alien warship remained operational in human space. The celebration that followed was extraordinary. News broadcasters wept with relief as they reported the victory. People poured into the streets in every city on Earth. Humanity had been saved, and Kevin Hayes was the man who had done it. He was called a genius, a military visionary, a hero who had thought beyond what everyone else believed was possible. General Morrison himself came to the flagship to congratulate Kevin personally. The old general shook Kevin's hand and patted him on the shoulder. "Extraordinary thinking, Commander," he said. "Absolutely extraordinary. You saw something nobody else could see." But there was something in Morrison's eyes that made Kevin uncomfortable. It was not admiration alone. There was also something that looked like concern, or perhaps calculation. Lisa pulled Kevin aside later that evening. The war room was finally quiet, and most of the crew had been released to rest or to join the celebrations on the stations below. "They're already talking about you on the military networks," Lisa said. "Some people are calling your actions brilliant. Others are saying you disobeyed direct orders and got lucky." "Did I disobey?" Kevin asked. "I won the battle. I saved Earth." "Yes, you did disobey, and yes, you saved Earth. But that's not going to matter to everyone. There are people in the high command who don't like commanders who think for themselves. There are bureaucrats who believe that military success means following procedure, not breaking it. And you broke plenty of procedure today." Kevin looked out through the viewport at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, news of humanity's victory was spreading through the galaxy. But Lisa was right. He had broken the rules. He had been told to hold his position, and he had ordered a retreat instead. He had acted on instinct and intuition rather than on explicit command. For the first time since the battle ended, Kevin felt a chill run down his spine. He had won the war, but he had a feeling that his real problems were just beginning.